If you've watched the mainstream media's reporting in the last day or so, you've seen these tapes, which suggest that changing sexual orientation is not possible. In fact, at least one major study shows change is possible. Psychologist Mark Yarhouse explored the question in a 6-year work that he presented at the American Psychological Association's annual conference.
I think our study raises that question again. It says, well, wait a minute, here's a change effort sustained over time, and there's a pretty significant percentage of people for whom this was helpful.
Yarhouse and co-author Stan Jones followed 63 people who tried to change with the help of Christian ministries. 30% were able to reduce their homosexual attraction enough to be celibate without distress. And another 23% were able to convert to opposite sex attraction. Total that changed, 53%, although Yarhouse admits it's tough.
And our study shouldn't be taken to mean that anybody can change or that everybody can change. It does look like it's difficult.
Some mainstream media are reporting that the American Psychological Association, or APA, has rejected so-called conversion therapy. But that's just not true. The APA has not banned it or even deemed it unethical. However, its latest statement does raise concerns. A 2009 task force report says efforts to change sexual orientation are unlikely to be successful and involve some risk of harm. Still, the APA notes that for some, sexual orientation identity is fluid, perhaps an open door for more research on this controversial subject. Heather Sell, CBN News.
And joining us now with more is Dr. Mark Yarhouse, who you just heard from in our story. Doctor, how has your research been received by fellow psychologists so far?
Well, the research we've done has looked at whether it's possible to change orientation through involvement in Christian ministries, and that research, some people view it as contributing something to the discussion. Others find that to be very controversial and tend not to focus on it.
We've heard from just yesterday an expert on ABC, a so-called expert, who said that repetitive therapy is so fringe that it's practically on Mars. What do you say to that?
Well, it isn't considered in the mainstream in the APA, and so I think part of the issue is it's a research question. Is it possible to change orientation, and is it likely to cause harm? And that's an empirical question that should be studied for people where it matters, and that's typically conservative religious people who seek this type of therapy. So it's true that it's not studied that much, it's not researched that much. I don't know how often it's conducted as therapy, but that's really the cultural climate we live in today.
Now, you talked about harm. Critics say that it is harmful because it leads to false hope. How do you respond to that?
Again, it's a research question. Is it likely to cause harm? There are certainly anecdotes, testimonies of people saying it's been harmful. There are testimonies of people saying it's been helpful. But that's why behavioral scientists do research, is to see how likely is it to cause harm. And so we really don't have the quality of research to answer the question, how likely is it to cause harm? In fact, one of the most widely cited studies of harm was a study that purposely sought out people who had been harmed by the treatment and then reported on their experiences. So if you seek people out who say that they've been harmed, you're likely to have that finding.
Absolutely. Those are certainly going to be the results. Briefly describe for people how reparative therapy works. What happens?
Well, reparative therapy is a subtype of reorientation therapy. So there are many ways that people in the past have tried to bring about a change of sexual orientation. Reparative therapy is a special type that is based on psychoanalytic principles. So we're looking at the 1960s, 1970s, thinking about parent-child relationships. And the idea there for a male, for example, would be a close binding and meshed relationship with his mother and a distant, detached father. And that's the idea behind that. But the research on that is not particularly convincing today.
How do you define success with this type of therapy?
Well, that's part of the problem in the research, is that people have defined success differently. They've measured it by whether the person's capable of heterosexual functioning, whether they ever get married, whether they report same-sex attractions, whether their analyst said that they were experiencing attraction to the opposite sex, and so on. So that's part of the question. We're back really to square one. Have we looked at good data as to whether reorientation can change?
You've done a lot of research into this area. What are some of your findings in terms of the origins of homosexuality?
Well, I haven't directly studied whether what causes homosexuality, but that's another fundamental question. When you look at can you change orientation, it's often premised on what caused homosexual orientation. And the short answer to that is we don't know. We really don't know what contributes. It's probably weighted differently for different people. Probably both nature and nurture contribute to some extent, but we really don't know the cause of it.
Really quickly, we're just about out of time, but in the psychology community, there seems to be a slant against people leaving the gay lifestyle. What are your findings? Is that a bias you think that does exist?
Well, I do think there is a sweeping sort of cultural consensus within various fields that people are either born this way or they are this way, and so they should embrace a gay identity. What we've been studying in our institute is people who say no to that identity and form an identity around other parts of who they are as a person. So sometimes for religious people that might be an identity in Christ, for example, and they make that central. It's more salient to them than the fact that they experience same-sex attractions. And that can be discussed in therapy independent of whether orientation changes.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.